Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you about a story that took place off the coast of Georgia in 1803. It is important that we know what happened to our forefathers and tell their stories to our children, and even walk away and learn a thing or two for ourselves. Never ever say the U.S. did not know who they were getting during chattel slavery, because they knew damn well who these slaves were. And they wanted a specific type of slave, not just any old random black person. That's not what they wanted. And I'll tell you why they wanted these people. But let's get into this story. The tragic yet resilient story of Igbo slaves. Igbos were Hebrews, ladies and gentlemen. Many of you already know that, who committed mass suicide off U.S. coast in 1803. Now, why the Igbos? Let me explain why. The Igbos, Ibos, and Ebos were expert planters and farmers over in Africa. And they were highly sought after slaves for the South to grow crops. So they didn't want any old slave. They wanted the ones that were experts at growing crops. And these were the experts, ladies and gentlemen. Now, one thing about the Igbo slaves, they were the ones that put up a lot of fight and resistance whenever they went into chattel slavery. They were the hardest to break in. Let's get into this story. The stories of slave resistance, many of us know, have to do with bloodshed, violence, and destruction. But there are other acts of resistance whose stories are worth being told. Take that of the Igbo Landing, also called the Igbo Landing, the Igbo Landing, or Igbo's Landing. All of those terms mean Hebrew, ladies and gentlemen. Here is the landing in Georgia. So never say the U.S. did not know who we were. They named the landing post Hebrew. Igbo means Hebrew. Never say they didn't know. They indeed did know. The Igbo Landing is a historic site at Dunbar Creek at St. Simon's Island, Glenn County, Georgia. It is the site of the largest mass suicides of enslaved people in history. Historians say Igbo captives from modern-day Nigeria purchased for an average of $100 each by slave merchant John Copper and Thomas Spalding arrived in Savannah, Georgia on the ship called the Wanderer. That was the name of the slave ship in 1803. And these are just monuments to what happened in the creek. The chained slaves were then reloaded and packed under the deck of a coastal vessel, the York, which would take them to St. Simon's, where they were to be resold. During the voyage, approximately 75 Igbo slaves rose in rebellion. They drowned their captors, so they actually were able to overtake the crew, and they drowned them. They drowned their captors and caused the grounding of the ship in Dunbar Creek. The Igbos were known by planters and slave owners of American South to be fierce, independent, and more resistant to chattel slavery. So they actually put up the biggest fight during chattel slavery. According to Professor Terry L. Snyder, the enslaved cargo suffered much by mismanagement, rose from their confinement in the small vessel and revolted against the crew, forcing them into the water where they drowned, led by their chief. So they actually had the chief of the Igbos on this ship, and they were trying to put him also in chattel slavery. The Africans then marched ashore singing. At their chief's direction, they walked into the marshy waters of Dunbar Creek, committing mass suicide. Ladies and gentlemen, it was 75 of them that committed mass suicide. There were many that preferred death over chattel slavery. Roswell King, a white overseer on a nearby plantation called Pierce Butler Plantation, is the first to have recorded the incident. He and another man, identified only as Captain Patterson, recovered 13 bodies. The others remained missing, and some are believed to have survived the suicide episode. For centuries, some historians cast doubt on the event, suggesting that the entire incident was more folklore than fact. But a post-1980 search verified the accounts of Roswell King and others provided at the time, using modern scientific techniques to reconstruct the episode and confirm the factual basis of the long-standing oral accounts. A lot of our stories are true. Our ancestors, that's one thing about our people. We have no reason to lie about history. We are not the ones that have to lie about history. Those that lie about history, they lie because they know their history is evil. And then they try to make lies up to try to soften it up. But there is no softening up evil. The site was designated as a holy ground by the St. Simon African American community in September 2012. The Igbo Landing is also now part of the curriculum for coastal Georgia schools. The Igbo Landing has become occupied a great symbolic importance in local African American folklore. The mutiny and subsequent suicide by the Igbo people have been called the first freedom march in the history of the United States, and local people claim that the landing and surrounding marshes in Dunbar Creek were haunted by the souls of the dead Igbo slaves. There are myths of the water walking Africans heard about the Igbo's landing, that the place where they brought the Ibos over in the slave ship. And when they get there, they ain't like it. And so they started singing, and they march right down in the river to march back to Africa. But they ain't able to get there. They gets drowned. One Floyd White, an elderly African American interviewed by the Federal Writers Project in the 1930s, said, "There is also the myth of the flying Africans, where people report that the Igbos flew to Africa." Wallace Quarterman, an African American born in 1844, was interviewed in 1930 about the Igbo Landing, said, "You ain't heard about them." Well, at that time, Mr. Blue, he was the overseer And Mr. Blue, he go down one morning with a long whip to whip them good. Anyway, he whipped them good and they got together and struck a hoe in the field and then rose up in the sky and turned themselves into buzzards and flew right back to Africa. Everybody knows about them. So this is definitely a powerful story of resistance by these people. And these are illustrations that were done by an artist. His name is Donovan Nelson, to pay tribute to those Igbo slaves that died in a mass suicide. So there you go. And actually, Beyonce did a tribute to them called Love Drought. But I'm not going to play that because of copyright strikes and all that stuff. So I will leave the link to this article and you can come out and read it over for yourself. These Hebrews are gone, but we will never forget them. Please tell me what you think, ladies and gentlemen. Please leave your comment and subscribe. Don't forget to hit on the notification bell. And I will see you on the next video. Peace, family.